the opposite of madness is not necessarily reason, but sanity, and sanity can be produced by quite simple things.
Creative people say this voice is talking to me, this inner voice is telling me things. The person with the psychosis hears a voice, they look around, they don't see them, they search for them.
Psychosis is related to people's life stories. There is a story about neurochemicals like dopamine. I think that's very important. It is part of the story.
The madness of one epoch may become the sanity of the next, and the pages of history are littered with great artists and innovators who were deemed mad when they first explored their ideas. So might madness be a form of wisdom rather than its diseased opposite? Or is it a medical condition that needs to be defined and treated? So here to discuss this we have a very fascinating panel. On my right we have Robert-Rowland Smith, who is Quondam Fellow of All Souls College, Oxford. He's also a consultant, lecturer, and writer in philosophy, literature, and psychoanalysis. And Robert's books include Death Drive and Breakfast with Socrates. Here we have on the far left Patricia Casey, who's Professor of Psychiatry and author of 7 books related to mental health. Patricia's main focus is on adjustment disorders and spreading mental health awareness in her column Mind and Meaning in the Irish Independent. And here is Richard Bentall, who's Professor of Clinical Psychology at the University of Liverpool and author of Madness Explained and Doctoring the Mind. And he researches in particular childhood trauma, psychosis, and public mental health. So I'm sure many of you are aware of the format already, but I'll just briefly go through it. We have a 3-minute pitch from each of our discussants where they advance their main contentions, and then we go through to a debate divided roughly into 3 parts.
When I was invited onto this panel, I thought straight away of this famous spat in the 1960s between Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. Michel Foucault had written this book called History of Madness, and Derrida said, well, there's a basic problem with writing a history of madness because a history of madness is a rational project, right? It's a reason-based project to write about madness, and Derrida's argument is, well, if there is such a thing as madness, it will always escape any rational account of it. So there's a kind of in-principle difficulty in even beginning to talk about madness because you are cladding it about with rational structures. You're giving it conceptual architecture, which if it's mad, it will always somehow escape. So I think that's a kind of general protocol to put into this debate. Can we ever touch this thing called madness using reason? After all, this panel is based on reason. This is a reason debate about madness and reason, not a mad debate about madness and reason.
Well, it was pretty mad, but
Although,
yes, now.
we'll see what transpires in the next hour. So that's, I guess that's the first thing to say. The next thing to say, I think, is that putting madness and reason as complete opposites might be a bit of a problem for various reasons. But one reason I think is to do with language, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit today. So one of the reasons that this is a reasonable or reason-based session is that we understand one another in this room. Right? We're using the same language, and up to a point, I mean, we might not understand everything, but there's a convention that enables us to understand one another. And it strikes me that one definition of madness, or the mad person, is the person who can't be understood. So if you are, I mean, I do, with my other hat, as a consultant, kind of business consultant, I do actually quite a lot of work with mental health organizations. And in some of the most kind of extreme cases, in the kind of forensic end, in high security wings of such institutions, you do get people in those institutions who are not possible to understand. They're speaking their own language. They are, as it were, beyond cognition, or apparently beyond cognition or recognition by so-called sane people. But it strikes me, actually, if you take one, let's use the word mad person, and put them together with another mad person who speaks the same language, and those two people start conversing, question becomes, well, are they still mad? They're making sense to one another. They have a conventional understanding. They're able to communicate in their own terms. They're making sense. So is that still madness? So I wonder if there's something about madness which is about an absolute kind of singularity just being in isolation, not being understood by other people at all. But as soon as you begin to become understood, I wonder if that begins to erase the difference between madness and reason. And the third thing I would like to say, again with my other hat on, is I guess the question of whether it's reason that's the opposite of madness or sanity. So this panel could have been about madness and sanity as opposed to madness and reason, right? And it's very interesting that certainly the kind of professionals I work with in that sphere, and my fellow panelists will probably say more about this, it's interesting that there's a real scale. You know, you're not either mad or sane. You know, there are degrees. There clearly are degrees. And what's particularly interesting for me is that there are so many things outside of the mind that create madness rather than things inside the mind. So certainly in these mental health organizations that I'm working with, there are simple checklists of indicators that lead to madness. So for example, if you have a decent home, if you have a job, if you have a family and friends, the chances of you developing mental illness go radically down than if you don't have those things. So although we tend to think of madness, psychosis, as a kind of internally created kind of corruption of the brain in some way, actually, in many, many ways, there are very simple social structures that can be put in place to relieve people of the anxiety that can blow up into kind of more extreme forms of stress and ultimately psychosis or schizophrenia and so on. So I'm quite interested in that idea of kind of madness that exists outside the brain and can be, you know, mitigated by very simple, sensible structures, and kind of remind us that actually the opposite of madness is not necessarily reason, but sanity. And sanity can be produced by quite simple things, you know, having a home, having a job, having a network.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, I'm going to turn to Patricia Casey with the same question, which is, might madness be a strange form of wisdom rather than its diseased?
I was hoping to convince you all of my argument with this headline that I saw on yesterday's Evening Standard. Sheep go on psychotic rampage through Welsh village after eating cannabis plants. And I was hoping that I would head out there with my injection, my needle, my syringe, inject the sheep and impress you all by the prowess of medication to treat these psychotic sheep. Unfortunately, it happened in Swansea, so they're nowhere near this part of the world, and they may not have eaten the cannabis anyway. I want to tell you about some patients, because there's nothing like patients and ill people to ground you. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I have a caseload of about 200 patients, and I'm on call 1 week in 4. I'm the second on call. My junior doctors are the first on call. They're at the cold face. And so get called 2 or 3 times, most nights, about patients usually presenting to the emergency department. I work in a general hospital. And an example, one night I was called about a man in his 40s. He's well known to me. He has been a patient of mine for 18 months. He first became psychotic when he was abusing cannabis, but his recent episodes have been independent of cannabis. He has always had the following symptoms. He believes that his wife is poisoning his food, and she's only poisoning one of his foods, a particular fish that he eats, not his meat, not his vegetables, just his fish. How does he know that? He doesn't know how he knows that. He just knows that she is. He's had 4 admissions in the 18 months I've been treating him, and all except the last one were under the Mental Health Act. He was admitted compulsorily because of his level of disturbance. The most recent admission occurred when he told his wife that he believed she was poisoning his food. There was a row. He hit her. He ran out of the house. He walked and ran for 20 miles round the perimeter of Dublin. The Gardaí were eventually notified that this man was behaving strangely when he tried to cross a 6-lane motorway running out of Dublin, shouting, "They're coming after me, they're coming after me." Fortunately, the traffic was at snail's pace because it was rush hour. The Gardaí were called and he was brought into the Garda station, that's the police station, then to my hospital, to the emergency department, and my junior doctor said to me, what will we do? Now, I didn't think to call the local philosopher, and I didn't think to call the local cognitive therapist. That will come later on, when he's well. But at the moment, he is acutely disturbed. I have to get him into hospital and treat him.